about more than threat intelligence feeds. I came up with a bunch of words that I put together called contextual threat intelligence. And I hear a lot of people talking about threat intelligence like, oh, we bought threat intelligence from here, or we got it open source from over here. Oh, I forgot to tell you I'm going to start. Thanks. So I don't know if you guys have seen this too, but I lose track of kind of when trends started. I've got a couple of preteen and teenage daughters, so life's kind of a blur. I think somewhere in the past, I don't know, a couple of years, 18 months, I really started to hear an uptick in, hey, you have to get this shiny new threat intelligence. So a real brief background on myself. My background is I've been in the Army Reserves for probably 22 years now. Started off basically in infantry. Had an opportunity to spend some time at Fort Bragg in PsyOps, which I will not use during this talk. And after that, so I went to Bosnia with them in the 90s. Transitioned over to long-range surveillance, LRS. Traditionally, it's a 6-man team that goes, if this is the forward line of your own troops, whatever, it's the battle lines. Similar to where we used to think we had perimeters, right? You might go 100 kilometers past that and then get tactical intelligence that you send back over SATCOM, right? So after that, we deployed a couple of times, and my transition from long-range surveillance into what I do now is actual cyber threat intelligence for various agencies through the Department of Defense on the part-time side. They still have a regular full-time gig. When I hear threat intelligence, my mind immediately goes somewhere else. It doesn't go to which vendor or which open source. So that's kind of the context around some of the craziness you'll see in just a minute here. But the data science piece, a few years ago for a company that I won't mention, somebody was running bind 8, and they should have been. And somebody handed me like 50 million rows of stuff, and it was a little bit overwhelming. I did not know what to do with said 50 million rows of disparate data sources. And I had a little challenge with that. So I decided never again. I'm going to figure out how to do data analysis. That's not exactly what I would call big data, but it was on the back of my mind. So I started looking into it and ended up last year starting a graduate degree in data science because I think that there is a real application to looking at not just sensor data, but as you'll see in a minute, as we talk about the intelligence cycle and the intelligence process, I think there's an analogy to be made where instead of the imagery person who's heads down, think the visual stuff you see from historical footage of the Cuban Missile Crisis and those briefings. Somebody was measuring the shadow lengths and saying, well, this is why we think. So that's one of the ints, one of the intel sources. In our world, we have a lot of those ints, but somebody needs to be the all-source analyst, kind of higher up there saying, well, what are we looking for? What are we trying to defend? What are we trying to protect against? And what are the indicators that will tip us off to let us know whether or not we see these things? So this is more about the process, the intelligence cycle, and how I think that not hiring a bunch of data scientists, I understand that that's not that feasible, but having somebody on the team, after, for example, after they finish their advanced network forensic analysis, their malware reverse engineering, disk-based, then you got SSD, and then your mobile. So in their free time after that, all I'm proposing is that they add data science to it. Cool? Not too bad. So what are we talking about with intelligence? I like to think of things visually in terms of terrain. So this is in northern Iraq. This is Sinjar Mountain. You may have heard there were some issues there, in the last year or two ago. Maybe 10,000 people were stranded up there. And Mosul is right over in this area. So essentially, I was the commander of this long-range surveillance unit, and I got tapped on the shoulder. I was the second in command in 2008, and they said, hey, we need you to take over command about a year early. Great, sir, no problem. What do you need me to do? He's like, well, you're going to take the unit to Iraq, and we're going to do long-range surveillance. Great. The problem was we were already slated to be disbanded because of some Department of Defense restructuring at the time. So we were down to 55 to 60% strength. We didn't have enough people to do what we needed to do. Sound familiar? The other thing that's going to sound familiar is it's very specialized. One Sergeant E5, and especially an E6, on a 6-man LERS team needs to have gone to infantry school, to airborne school, ranger school, pathfinder school, reconnaissance and surveillance leaders course, RSLIC. You can't shake and bake people like that. Yet, the clock is ticking, the adversary is coming. What do you do? This is the same area, and I'm going to call this a boundary, a network perimeter boundary, if you will. Boundary and border, imagine quote marks around that. So this is Syria, this is Iraq, and the whole backstory here is cigarettes come in from Turkey, and people cross the border at night, maybe 10 p.m. every night. About 4 people go from Iraq into Syria, and about 2 in the morning, we want to make sure that 4 people come back across, not 7 people. If it's 7 people, those additional 3 are going to come down, and they're going to come and exploit seams between the different groups, gaps between the different teams where nobody's really watching, and they get facilitated through rat lines. I don't know why I was pointing in that'd be like some other country. They get facilitated through rat lines, Mosul down to Baghdad, they blow themselves up, get on CNN, mission accomplished for them. So we are interested in north-south, unauthorized traffic. And we're also interested in east-west, unauthorized traffic. I pulled some slides from a capabilities brief, which again is something that I try to encourage the folks around me. I'm on a hunt team now. I don't mention the different people that pay me for different things because it's easier that way, but I think if you happen to have a logging monitoring team, an incident response team, somebody that does your forensics, somebody else that does, pen testing, somebody else in vulnerability management, that type of thing, it's good, especially for new people as there's churn, for one team to tell the other ones, here's what we do. Now, you know what vulnerability management is, but if I give you how we do it, it's different than how you do it. Same thing for the incident response, and the capabilities 6 months ago are probably a little bit different, if not even the tool sets. So this is a capabilities brief for the LERS company, about 150 people. There's nothing classified in here. I blocked some stuff out just because. So this is our unit, F Company 425th Infantry. This is also an interesting concept, the mission essential task list, the medal assessment. So very briefly, there's the collective tasks that the team has to be able to do together. Think tabletop exercises, Dell SecureWorks comes in, they do what they need to do. Sorry for my Rubio moment there. So after that, you've got the collective tasks down to the individual tasks. So I don't know if any of you have challenges with hiring, retention, and then just the never-ending treadmill of stuff that you have to learn to keep up with the never-ending flow of evil trying to come into your network, or more likely that's probably already there, we just don't know about it yet. So what do we do? I saw a lot of parallels here in terms of specified tasks. So we've got NAI observation, named area of interest. Again, terrain back to network, a named area of interest of specific focus area. Can anybody give me an example of if you're hunting for evil in your network, just shout it out. What might be a specific focus area that you're going to go watch or put a sensor there? Say again? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sure we'd rattle off, 6 or 8, depending on our environment. But there's an area, point, and route recon. A lot of parallels there. And then also pre- and post-raid interdiction. If you're fortunate enough to have a pen testing team that has a good relationship, meaning drinks beer with the incident response and hunt team, what about this for a concept? Hey, why don't you guys go and hit this general area, hit this target, and why don't you see what you can do with PowerShell, and why don't you see if you can bypass this and that. But before that, it's not black box. It's a planned training exercise, unless you're up at that level where you don't need to do that. It's a planned training exercise where pre and post attack, I'm watching. Full packet capture. I'm going to grab a memory dump before. I'm going to grab a memory dump after. And then the sensor to shooter target interdiction, I think that gets into kind of a higher level maturity model in our world where if you've got all your stuff cranking, right, and you've got your integration done, and you detect this on the endpoint and it fires over here, checks the autonomous system number, or runs something up against virus total, gets some hashes and that kind of stuff. If it can take some action while you're investigating it, I think that's a good thing. So you probably see the intelligence cycle that's going to come up in a few slides, but this is what we call the F3 EAD: find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze, and disseminate. Different words, different graphs, talking about the same thing. Where's the badness? Let's focus on this particular thing because we can't boil the ocean, right? Finish, take care of the problem. Exploit, analyze, refine, priority in PIRs and SIRs, bless you. Priority intelligence requirements and specific intelligence requirements we're going to talk about in the context of the intelligence cycle in a few slides. But develop follow-on targets. You pull on an investigative thread, right? And from that, hopefully we're taking notes, and hopefully we've got good case notes, and there's a repository. So if there was a phishing campaign 2 weeks ago, and over here we know that executives, A, B, and C at ourdomain.com popped up on whatever, threat intelligence thing, hopefully we're able to go to some sort of historical record of these bad things that happen, of maybe not a full-out breach or infiltration or data exfiltration, but I don't know about you, but what I've seen in the past is many times incident response, and I've done this, we're all busy. Incident response gets a trigger, they get an alert, they do the investigation, maybe they throw servlet on something, pull it back, acquire whatever they need to do. But they fix that problem, they remediate it, because I'm not going to put the incident response diagrams up there, but I don't think I remember anything on there about, hey, go record what you just saw so that the next time you come across this route, you come across this topic, for example, back to the train, how many IEDs were there in the past 30 days? What's the pattern? What's the disturbed earth indicators of that? If we're not collecting all that stuff, we're just cleaning up the incidents, we're missing some internal intelligence there. You have to have the obligatory cool guy picture with the eyes blacked out. But all kidding aside, I've got an absolute world of respect for those guys. We did what we could to bring in an extra, 70 to 80 people in an 18-month time period. And we used what we had. We call it hip pocket training. Maybe we can't send somebody off to a 3-month school, but maybe something, so when you have 20 minutes, you guys get together and you do that knowledge sharing, but everybody had to do that. And we had to be structured about it. We had to make sure, because these are kinetic, these are real world things. We had to protect each other while we were out hunting, doing the reconnaissance, doing the surveillance, or, not to be dramatic, but somebody's not coming home to their family. So we took that very seriously. Stealth and successful infiltration. I don't talk about defense and offense. I totally get it. I totally get it. But between you and me, I think there's going to be a lot of pen testers over the next couple of years, that start to get this sense they come up with games. I'm going to see if it's like when I learned the cheat codes in StarCraft a long time ago. The only way to make that interesting is to see how quickly can I clear this board. And it's okay, this is interesting for a few minutes. Okay, 12 minutes, but whatever it was. It's interesting, but then, the craving isn't satisfied. You got to do it a little faster. I think that there is going to be a trend towards interactions and then integrations, rotations between hunt team, between red team, If nothing else, just to mix things up a little bit. But how many times have you or somebody that you know been on an engagement or done something internally where you're like, hey, here's this awesome report, and you need to fix all these things, and check me out because I did that in 8 hours, right? And I think, and this is just, I'm paraphrasing some things that people have shared with me in the past. I think that there's an opportunity for hunt team, and then by extension, incident response, to factor in stealth, the concepts of operational security or OPSEC. For example, if you throw a servlet out on a machine and somebody's on that machine, or, I'm not trying to be tool-centric, but the idea is if there's an active attacker on that machine, are you doing anything? Are you tipping your hand? I see heads nodding because you know exactly what I mean. It's hard. It's hard to get done what you need to be done and tiptoe through those things. And I come up with a lot of examples. The stuff I'm talking about here is from 2009 in northern Iraq. But so that's kind of wide open spaces, right? Desert. And there's mountain stuff and border stuff. But in 2004 and 2005, I was with the same group as the platoon leader, and that was Baghdad. Well, how do you do long-range surveillance in a 20-kilometer area? It's when you go and occupy a hide site before dawn, and you're going to stay there for a couple of days. We know that people are aware of it. If I come and dig a hole in your backyard, I might camouflage it, but you're probably going to come out and ask me what the hell I'm doing in your backyard, because that's the normal sights and sounds and stuff. So I think that there's an opportunity for us to look at some of these things in the context of how to merge, how to cross-pollinate skill sets, and that type of thing. This capability is one of many capabilities, but it can do things that other things can't. If there's overhead collection platforms, there are different atmospheric or other constraints that might get in the way. And if you need to get eyes on an named area of interest, an NAI, or any objective for whatever you're doing, you have to make sure that you have a primary, alternate, contingency, emergency plan to get that. So here's the intelligence cycle. Probably all seen this before. I'm going to break this down and give you an example of how I see this against that terrain. But in the back of your mind, keep in mind the analogy between the terrain and our environment, which we'll start talking about as the operating or operational environment. So planning and direction, collection, processing, exploitation, analysis and production, dissemination. And all this is in support of whatever mission we're given. What do we mean by planning and direction? Let's switch up. Laser pointers, keep things going here. Damn thing. Broken. All right, so again, Syria here, Iraq here. This is a shark with a laser pointer. It kind of keeps things going. See a head nod back there? Okay. Priority intelligence requirements. We want to know what are the mission and intelligence requirements. Example, mission focus. Degrade the adversary's ability to conduct offensive operations in this area of operations, AO Sinjar. Fulfill the intelligence requirements by collecting information with little or no filters. It's the raw data, right? Just go collect it. Processing the exploitation. This is the bridge. It's the first pass of filtering. We're translating, transcribing, converting data into a consumable format. Sound familiar? Analyze the raw data, but we have to make sure we catch it. We need to know what the incident response team found this year, last year, etc. Exploratory data analysis, EDA, you hear people talk about in the analytics world. Pattern analysis, connecting the dots, distilling this into an assessment. The big thing for me is you're developing the picture. Dissemination. After intelligence product review, disseminate to customers. So here's the thing. Whatever you do in this room, sometimes you're a consumer, sometimes you're a producer. But we need to be able to have that back and forth and understand. But if we're all focusing on developing a common operating picture and feeding that information to the people that need it, we're going to answer the boss's requirement, the tasking, the mission, protect this house, protect this area. Deliver vetted intelligence product to customers and publish for others that they need to know. It's got its own challenges around it. not going to get up here and give a talk about a deception platform, right? If you have 30, 40,000 people in your organization, you don't need 50 people there knowing about a deception platform. So you have to have some sort of a method for sharing that as it needs to be and no farther. So I look at the joint publication 2.0. This is a little bit better than some of the things I've seen in the past. I got this off of Google. Again, there's nothing classified in anything I'm talking about here today in spirit or anything else. What I like about this, though, is the operational environment. The operational environment, that's not just the terrain, that's just not just the ground, it's the human terrain. It's in that world, the geopolitical. Well, we've got human terrain. Does anybody have phishing tests? I'm not going to comment on, anything further along those lines, but phishing, security awareness, all that kind of stuff, it's part of the human terrain, which is part of the operational environment. Data, there's more data than I would ever be able to pay for in storage. Various ingestion rates for various vendors get a little bit pricey. There has to be a way to prioritize these intelligence requirements, PIRs, so that we can deploy sensors, different assets, go get questions answered from the ints, from the human, from open source or OSINT, certainly a lot of measurement and other things like that. The processing and exploitation. Again, it's a numbers game. You have limited resources. There are, pressing issues to get to. So having some sort of a clarity, some methodology, some data-driven approach to figuring out how to develop a better common operating picture of our operational environment, I think is critical. And then, of course, the analysis and production is something that we can really make an impact by being very careful about what information we produce, who we give it to, because if you arm smart people with the right information, you're going to see some good results. So preparation of the operational environment. We define the operational environment. That's tough, right? Asset management. Again, not sexy stuff. Define the operational environment and be brutally honest and find a way to package that and explain that to management in terms of the impact of the operational environment. Local admin rights. Evaluate the adversary and relevant actors. There are threat platforms, threat intelligence feeds. We're not going to build out a full-blown agency in any of our companies. This is a mindset. This is an additional hat we put on as needed, but it's a framework for thinking about these things. So ISR is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and that's where long-range surveillance live. And I call that about the same as a hunt team. It's an activity that synchronizes and integrates the planning and operation of sensors, assets, and processing, exploitation, and dissemination systems. So I think of the intelligence cycle, the intelligence process, a little bit differently than I do the intelligence feeds. And I think of that as separate from the intelligence support platform. That's all of your stuff and how you integrate it and what fires when and who consumes that and how you manage those APIs and the manual pieces. So you don't need to be able to read all this. The big point here, and we'll come back to this with an example, is the priority intelligence requirements. It's intelligence requirements. Out of all the things we want to know, it's narrowed down. It's prioritized to say, this is what we want to find out. And from that, we have information requirements. And if we don't know where to get that, or we have blanks that need to be filled in, we have an RFI, a request for information. Again, tracking those RFIs. This team needed to know this, and they didn't even know who to ask. That's valuable. That's a lesson learned right there. Write it down, capture it. Not proposing changing any org charts, not adding systems or changing architecture, just a mindset. From that RFI, you might be able to task a collection requirement. Can you go find this out for me? And when you find that out, Can you look at it through this lens and report back to me what you found out? So that's how I see intelligence. Threat intelligence, put a couple definitions in there. It's evidence-based, it's got context, and it's actionable. Now, most of us aren't probably going to have an entire team that does this. If you do, that is awesome. But somehow we need to be aware of what is knocking on our door, and as we'll get into in a minute, what's already inside our doors, and maybe not making any noise, and find out some techniques that we can run through this whole process to go and hunt, whether that's reconnaissance, persistence, that type of thing. Assume breach, we've heard these things. I left out all the threat landscape and all the other stuff. I'm sure we're painfully aware of that. Big fan of detection. Signature-based detection, not something that we need to spend a lot of time counting on. And I think that threat intelligence primarily is a force multiplier. It enhances visibility and it builds that common operating picture. That's an iterative process. It continues to refine and develop that common operating picture. So all I would say here is that I'm going to talk a little bit today about persistence when we get there. So threat intelligence to rescue? Nope. It is a component of a larger process, which is different from a finished intelligence product. Priority intelligence requirement in a different environment might be, is the adversary going to attack in the next 24 hours? And then from there, the planning process or the staff distills that down, breaks that down into what are the indicators that might tip us off if that's going to happen, and you bring that down. So here's the questions that you need from that. Who can answer this question? Maybe that's a human, maybe that's a SIGINT, maybe that's imagery, whatever it is. But somebody's got to, again, pull that together as an all-source analyst and have a fusion cell, which is, I'm taking some liberty with that term, but a fusion cell approach so that there's some level of air traffic control tower perspective looking at that and then bringing it together and distilling that into actionable items. So I hear a lot about external threat feeds. I'm a big fan. But I think the gap that I'm seeing is that internal threat intelligence is all around us, and we're missing out on a gold mine there. Many different ways to skin this cat. This is a paper that I looked at, and I think it's useful enough for what we're talking about. Tactical is where the on-network actions take place. Operational, intent and capabilities. I'm definitely more interested in the capabilities, but I understand how these things tie together. And then strategic, from the information that we find, how do we allocate resources? How do we influence decision makers to shore up gaps or to improve detection capabilities, to increase budget for training, on and on. There should be some action that comes from the insight that we're providing here. Just a few examples. We have flash or tipper reports for rapid dissemination. We do this probably normally. It's email. It's however we do it. Maybe they're automated reports or something's automated in terms of reporting. Other things, pager duty or however you're doing it. The word's getting out. But I think this is taking a little bit more structured view of it. So again, it's take your pick, right? Start somewhere and get a foothold. And the daily media highlight analysis, I didn't bring the example today, but recently I was working on a project in that graduate program where I had to use Tweepy for Python. Anybody heard of that? So you're basically going to go out and programmatically grab like the last 3,000 tweets for somebody, and then you can pull that out. Well, I did that against Dumpmon. Has anybody seen @Dumpmon? So there's a lot behind that he does before he throws it up on Twitter programmatically, but it was very structured and it was useful to pull that down. That's not something that anyone internally is necessarily going to care about right now, to say, well, hey, in the last 60 days, here's how many emails were compromised, and here's how many password hashes were compromised, and here's how many per day, and here's how many Google API keys. how many PGP keys and SSH keys they found. What's helpful about that, though, it's developing the skill set to be able to go out and do those things. I personally hadn't done that before, so it was a very useful training exercise. Training exercise to develop the capability, because I can turn around and apply that to something else now. So maybe there's some things that you look at either manually or programmatically to stay on top of things. Malware analysis reports. If you got cuckoo, that's great. If you got people doing a deeper dive, I'm just saying let's take a few minutes to think about what can we extract from that effort and store somewhere that will help us develop patterns and see trends over time, if nothing else, so that we don't pay for the same real estate twice. Easy for me to say. Threat intelligence feeds, IP, domain, URL. Sure you're familiar with a lot of those. Operational intelligence. I understand the vulnerability analysis reports and adversary assessments. I think that the benefit here is the weekly, monthly, and quarterly intelligence summaries, or as I would call this, twice a year, right? Because we have to be judicious with how we manage our time in terms of this additional duty. So, to me, all I would do here is the annual intelligence summary. It's just establishing that feedback mechanism with management to let them know that somebody is watching this. So we have security vendors that might provide some, basically an all-encompassing package, which is great. But if you've got that package, if you're fortunate enough to have that, do you have the processes in place? I mean, this is a distinct, focused, separate effort to put some of these processes around this to make sure that you're making the most of that and consuming that. So I really think that probably in the next year or so, some of these companies are going to start offering some professional services and maybe bringing people in from either private sector or former intelligence community or IC folks to, I mean, it's common sense, but if you haven't done it before, you can accelerate the learning and put some things on paper and get it hopping there pretty quickly. So contextual threat intelligence, enriching data to find evil. I think of FICO credit scores, right? When we talk about terrain, we also talk about population overlays. Well, think about population overlays in our worlds. You've got local administan, right? You've got executive-istan. You've got all these different places that kind of live in the same physical space, but it's a slightly different risk profile. And this is nothing new, but when we start looking at that like FICO scores or through, building out risk profiles, this is going to help us refine and focus our collection efforts against data-driven and better informed intelligence requirements. And with that, you might decide to place your sensors a little bit differently. You might decide to spend a little more time focusing in this area and a little less in that. And then, I understand it's good to have the structured format. I think that's a luxury, and I think it's better to learn how to munge data and deal with APIs and integrate systems. But as a starting point, I understand that. So the hunt team, lots of stuff. I'm pretty overloaded most of the time. I don't know about you, probably. There are so many things to keep up with. It's easy to miss something like lateral movement, right? It's easy to overlook the quiet, stealthy things, which is the name of the game. I liked this because it says we need to focus on attacks that we can't necessarily catch in real time. David Bianco has the Pyramid of Pain, which I didn't put on here. You've probably already seen it a few times this year. But what I liked about this definition was to locate entrenched threats. Who knows? Who knows how long they've been there? They're good at watching what we're doing. And I like that he's talking about operating system events, net flow data, and that type of thing. So maybe looking in some different places. My working definition is the hunt team looks for unknown threats by combining proficiency in network security monitoring, malware analysis, and threat intelligence with data science skills. So nothing too complicated there, right? Now, I understand that this is pie in the sky, and I ran into Ben 10 from, it was at a Hack for Kids conference last summer, and I told him about some ideas I had around this, and he was very polite about it, but he looked at me and he's like, well, how does that help my small team? How does this is for, a larger enterprise that's got this. And I completely got that. And I really tried to factor that feedback in real time when I developed this concept as I implemented some things, made some of my own professional development decisions, and was putting this together. But again, I think this is a mindset that can be right-sized, and whatever amount is able to be implemented, I think it's worthwhile. And I'm also a big fan of the offensive skills, understand the adversary TTPs. I'm in the SANS graduate program, the incident response certificate. I have a couple of other graduate degrees. My wife's very patient, but I think she's going to cut me off at like 2 or 3 plus the other one. So I chose the incident response one, but after that I'm going to do the offensive one too, because I think, if you got a way to manage that, personally, and that's not the only place, I just want to put a quick plug for them in there because I've been real pleased with what I've learned from there. I think that as a hunt team member, I need to be able to go execute that attack. Again, which is why if you've got some pen testers that are getting a little antsy because they're getting domain admin in like 8 hours every time as a personal game or a contest with themselves to basically make things interesting, there's a logical transition. There's a logical opportunity there to kind of converge some of these dynamics. So we talked about PIRs, Priority Intelligence Requirements. Was anybody at the SANS Threat Hunting Summit in New Orleans by any chance? If anybody wants a link to that stuff afterwards, there's just a ton of good information from the head of incident response at Google, Facebook, Salesforce was there, and there were a million examples. I'm exaggerating. There are many examples that I would have liked to include here, but I want to make sure we don't run short on time. So I focused on one thing. Is there evidence of persistence mechanisms within the environment? This is a little more specific than you'd probably see for a PIR. I just wanted to make sure we fit the example. So again, don't worry about the small font over here. The point is, there's a relationship between the priority intelligence requirements. There's a lot of stuff we want to know. Let's focus scarce resources on a few questions. And here we say, is there evidence of persistence mechanisms within the environment? Staff, subject matter experts, somebody distills that, translates that into information requirements. The most critical information requirements regarding the adversary and the environment needed by leadership in order to reach a logical decision. So we take PIRs down to information requirements. Are auto runs being used as a persistence mechanism? You might look at shim cache, you might look at at tasks, things like that. But in this example, we go down to a request for information. Again, it's useful then for everybody on the team to be familiar with what the other teams have access to what they can do, what their capabilities are, like the capabilities brief I mentioned previously. So there's a request for information, RFI. Go collect all the auto runs from all the endpoints during business hours. You can get more specific, but it works for our example. And then that turns into a production requirement. The person asking for this blank to be filled in also wants this analysis to be done. Identify the name, maybe the path, and the MD5 hash for all the auto runs with fewer than 3 instances. Now, a lot of people talk about we'll stack them, we'll do the long tail, and I think that's a great starting point. I think there's many more things that can be done as people develop their team's capability with analytics and individually. But this is a pretty straightforward example of you start from here, and then maybe you pivot over in a direction so that maybe this is a job that's run. And again, I'm not going to talk about vendors, but if you have an endpoint solution, maybe you look at the API integration so that from the endpoint, you can run this job and then toss that over to your threat intelligence, see what else we know about it, maybe bump it up against VirusTotal, and of all those, which ones have some nasty hashes, or same kind of thing with URLs. And none of these are smoking guns, silver bullets, but I think it's a repeatable approach that you can take. Was anybody at DerbyCon last year? Anybody see John Strand talk about Rita? So Rita is basically an open source tool. I can get the URL for anybody that wants it. But this is, an effort that they've made with some really smart math people and some developers to look for things like, analyzing logs for beacon behavior and concurrent logins. Or I don't know if it was here or somewhere else where they had looked specifically at, geographic infeasibility. So you log in to the VPN gateway from New York City, and then 30 seconds later from San Francisco, and then 2 minutes later from Taiwan, that kind of thing. So these are examples of some things that are open source. And John Strand, I'm a big fan. He's got a good video tutorial on that. When you start building this stuff out, and this is, you see the Kibana up here. If anybody's used Elk Stack, there's a lot of potential if you don't have a larger tool. But I think they might have a VM quick start or something where you can kind of start playing around with that. But these are things that are looking for periodicity and some other kind of heavy lifting math behind the scenes under the hood. Same thing with the beacons. So data science. What is a data scientist? A data scientist is a data analyst who lives in California. Someone who is better at statistics than any software engineer and better at software engineering than any statistician. A data scientist is a business analyst who lives in New York. A statistician who lives in San Francisco, or my favorite, statistics on a Mac. What do data scientists do? Analyze data for actionable insights. I think there's a lot more to that. These are a few points from the program I'm in, which is the Wisconsin program. So identifying the data analytics problems that offer the greatest opportunities to the organization. So a few slides ago, we were talking about, of all the stuff that we want to know, what problems do we want to focus scarce resources on? It's a data-driven approach to it. Determining the correct data sets and variables. Here's where you might struggle if you brought in some brilliant data scientists who don't do InfoSec, and you plop them down and you're like, all right, give me all the answers. Talk to me about @tasks. Talk to me about, and this is not a knock on, there's different domain knowledge focus areas. And this is the fascinating challenge for me, is trying to, work through examples where in the graduate program a lot you're talking about health data sets and all these things that lend themselves well to learning the craft while you're learning the InfoSec craft. But to move forward, and there are some people doing this, just a lot of it is vendor-based right now, and I'm a big supporter of talking to folks and see what they've got to offer. I just think that, number one, you can be a better consumer in asking the right questions when a vendor comes along if you've got some analytic background, or someone on the team. If you're in management, this is something that it might be worth spending 3 or 4 hours a week on. It helps develop that capability to refine and target our focus areas. Large sets of structured and unstructured data from disparate sources. My 50 million rows example. Cleaning and validating the data to ensure accuracy, completeness, and uniformity. So Phil Hagen, who teaches the Advanced Network Forensic Analysis course, which is FOR 572, big fan. If you haven't checked it out, you might want to. He talked about some, ridiculously large file that had so many different types of log formats in it that he would write a parser until it broke, and then he'd write another parser, and just on and on. So the munging, the data cleaning, that again, the unsexy, glamorous part, but it's very important. Otherwise, we don't know what we're talking about. Devising and applying models and algorithms to mine the stores of big data. Another overlap between the data science and the intelligence. We ask the questions that we know to ask. And there has to be an iterative process to go through and say, all right, is there a way that we can look at this in terms of FICO scores? And that's probably not the best example, but I think that it serves the purpose of saying, well, if this entity displays this behavior or this pattern of behavior, we're going to change the risk score because the past teaches us that based on these behaviors with these other factors, that's something that warrants a little bit more scrutiny. And I think there are absolutely parallels there. If somebody is prone to, not picking on people that clicked. I clicked on something a couple of years ago. I hadn't slept. I was working on some assembly program all night, and I'm not a developer. And hey, he caught me. You're gonna catch people, right? But if it's somebody who's consistently running afoul of the IT law, it's a more viable target for attackers potentially. And then, just interpreting the data and communicating that's also extremely important. So has anybody seen this book? It's DataDriven Security. I picked this up in late 2014. It's Jay Jacobs and Bob Brutus. I think there's an affiliation with the Verizon DBI report. And one of the gentlemen is now the chief data scientist at Rapid7, which is a new position they created. This quote is why I've been in my basement for 2 years, a year and a half, figuring this stuff out. The cyber world is just too large, has too many components, and has grown far too complex to simply rely on intuition. Only by augmenting and supporting your natural intuition with the science of data analysis will you be able to maintain and protect an ever-growing and increasingly complex infrastructure. They break it down in these 5 areas. Statistics, so that we can learn from the data. Programming, the glue that connects the data to the analysis. A lot of the workflow that I see in programs that I've looked at is, and this is arbitrary and anecdotal, but maybe the Python for the web scraping, for that kind of interaction, for the text mining, for the cleaning and manipulating and shaping. And then R, the IDE I use is RStudio, and I'll have a demo in a minute here. I'm going to start hurrying. That's more for R is a statistical programming language. So R and Python are the two, but then again, you get into larger data sets. Now you're talking Hadoop, Spark, Hive, and all that big data sexy. Domain expertise, setting and maintaining a purpose to the analysis, understanding active versus passive DNS and what that might mean from a resource standpoint, understanding choke points in a network so that we can have a data-driven suggestion or strong recommendation about which assets to deploy where. Just think of like a game trail camera. You got some moles or mice in the backyard, and I'm totally going to take care of that this summer. So if you put a game trail camera here, it might give you some rat lines, some patterns, and a pattern of life and that kind of thing. But the domain expertise is what gives you the application to apply the skills so that you can, in fact, direct and focus energy against problems that matter. Data management. This is where I talk about the intelligence support platform. That's a whole architecture job in and of itself. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but the more I look at it, it's like, we could have 2 people doing architecture for systems integration, which is another trend I think will be coming, because there are a lot of people scratching their heads. And it's not rocket science. It's just one of like 73 things that's got to get done, and there's a lot to it. But this takes it as one of the 4 focus areas. And then visualization. If you've used Maltego or Tableau, or actually R has a lot of packages that people do visualizations with, you need the light bulb to go off in the head of the person that you're trying to convey information to. And that is its own skill in and of itself. So this is R, and there are packages. There's the DataDriven Security guys wrote an R package that interacts with Simru services, and I just installed the package and then called libraries. There are different ways to get this, to use curl and actually go to the source, but I just, because demos and technology, I just took it easy and got it straight from their site. So let's look at ASN, and then from that, looking at the edges, and won't get into a lot of the details there, but this is an example from the Data-Driven Security book. It's one of the first things I looked at and where a light bulb came off in my mind, because what happens when you run this, again, not a silver bullet, not a smoking gun, but when you run this, you start to see some of the relationships. And I know, geolocation and triple proxy and this guy, I know that this doesn't mean that a special forces team is going to jump from 30,000 feet with oxygen and go find the house where this IP address is from and fix the problem. No, again, it's the ability to start working with this data like this, because you can turn around and apply this at internal targets. You can take the skill that you learned from this and then, again, pivot over here and say, well, I can answer this problem using the same mechanism I used here. And because we're in Indiana, I thought it would be appropriate last night to buy a API key for Showdown and look for ICS devices in Indiana. That's okay, right? It's okay. I don't know. I didn't touch any of them. So this is the information that you got from all these servers. Now, there are a lot of different ways to grab this information and pull it in. And I'm not saying R is the best one for that. I like the idea of getting something into that statistical environment, though, because that's a mess. It's a mess, but with some effort in R, you can clean some of the stuff up. So the program I'm in is less expensive than the Berkeley program. So Berkeley, their master's is like 60 grand. It's all distance learning. The one I'm in is about 29 grand. Northwestern's more. The data analyst is probably like 500 a month. What I wish would have existed last year was datacamp.com. $29 a month, and they have R, they have Python, they've got some machine learning. So everyone wants to go dashing straight for the machine learning, right? But doing the basic statistics in R and the basic data manipulation and that kind of work in Python starts to build that skill set. Again, back to the LURS example, starts to give you that ground up capability from an individual task to the team collective task. So my recommendation, if anyone's interested, and I'd be happy to give you an email address, and I don't think I put that on here, but come talk to me afterwards. What I wish I would have done is started with all the examples in that data-driven security book, and if it had existed, datacamp.com, just to get a better idea of where to go next. I'm very pleased with what I've seen in the program I'm in. It's a little bit intense, but there's plenty of caffeine and eye drops for that. And this might seem kind of crazy, but it's not an all or nothing proposition. It's an incremental, do I know more than I did last month about this? And can I find ways to apply this to intelligence requirements in our environment that are going to help me find evil in our network and influence decision makers to give us the tools and the decisions, really, the management focus to improve our security posture. So that was Contextual Threat Intelligence, building a data science capability into the hunt team. I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you and good hunting.